So, thank you very much for listening very patiently to this advertisement. This has been a paid message brought to you by ACODE, sponsor of the Call Quartet ACODE THETA conference. Thank you. All right, it's really a great pleasure now to introduce our first keynote of the morning. And I have to thank the conference organisers for giving me such an excellent pair of keynotes to introduce. Jim is someone that I have been following his work for some years, and Sue, of course, is a former colleague from Victoria, so it's a great pleasure for me to introduce them individually this morning. But Jim is the originator of a concept that I think is incredibly powerful with the reclaim hosting idea and the concept that our students need to be able to enact their own digital identities independently of our control, and more challengingly that we need to start understanding how our academics are doing this, I think is one of the most powerful ideas stimulating a re-examination of traditional IT and its place in a modern university, and I'm really very excited by what Jim's done there. He's also been a pedagogical innovator in terms of the work that he's done that's led to the DS 106 digital storytelling course. And people in New Zealand will have hopefully attended one of Alan Levine's sessions a couple of years ago when he shared that genuinely exciting pedagogical model. And for me, the thing that I love about that as an idea is that it not only is technologically exciting, it's pedagogically challenging. There's some really strong pedagogical ideas embedded into the design of the course. And lastly, the model of the course that is an itinerant, a gypsy course that moves its way around the world and is offered in different institutions is, again, an incredibly powerful idea challenging our concept of what it is that constitutes tertiary education, higher education, and the relationship with qualifications. So I'm going to invite Jim to come up and join us here on the stage and give what I look forward to be a really exciting keynote this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate that. He probably gave my talk better than I will, so we'll see. My name is Jim Groom, and talking about visions, I figured I'd bring out my favorite Vision, the Marvel figure. And I love this, even an android can cry. This is kind of going to be a little bit of a kind of techno-emo talk. And who am I? Why the hell am I here? My name is Jim Groom. I self-identify as an instructional technologist, although I've taught at the University of Mary Washington and other universities, City University of New York, etc. But my work at the University of Mary Washington from about 2005 to 2015 is probably why I'm here. And this is my online avatar. Does anyone in the audience know who this is? Anyone? This is Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather is kind of an American preacher of the 16th, 17th century. And actually, I found, about 2008, he's also a comic book hero, or villain, supervillain. Cotton Mather is one of the few figures who can battle Spider-Man successfully. And I don't know if you know much about Cotton Mather. He was also associated with the Salem witch trials. So it only makes sense that he should be associated with the Scarlet Witch, right? Who is Spider-Man's kind of significant other, or actually the Vision's too. So I got my avatar from this kind of figure, Cotton Mather, because before I was an instructional technologist, I had visions of being an English professor, early American fiction to be specific. And so my vision is kind of very much interested in this notion of that 80s, 70s past. That comic book I show you is from 1978. It's a Marvel team-up comic. They had them for about a year, 2 years. But I'm very much a creature of American pop culture from the 70s and 80s. And when I was giving a similar version of this talk, actually somewhat reworked now, I came across this interesting vision of the internet from a Swedish documentary, kind of almost like Anchor. So I'm going to play this for a second, and forgive me if you can't understand Swedish, but it is subtitled.
Sen finns det då ett avsnitt om hemdatorer som jag personligen är något lite mer skeptisk emot. Det talas i programmet om att vi allihopa kommer att sitta hemma då och beställa biljetter och sådana saker. Jag tvivlar på det. Själv har jag haft dator hemma i snart 4 år och jag hittar ingen som helst privat användning av den. Det är faktiskt så att telefonnummer hittar man enklast i telefonkataloger. Kakrecept hittar man enklast i bakböcker och matrecept lämpligen i kokböcker. Boken är ett sällsynt bra sätt att förvara stora mängder information i. Det är också så att de här så kallade hemdatorerna, vad man nu egentligen menar med dem, men om man menar det som det är vanligast med sådana här hemdatorer, nämligen att man kör dem på sin egen hemma-tv, så har jag ett bra förslag till alla som funderar på att skaffa sig någonting sånt. Sätter 3 kvällar i rad på 40 centimeters avstånd från er färg-tv hemma och så tittar ni igenom Rapport kväll efter kväll 3 kvällar i rad. Om ni fortfarande vill ha en hemdator så köp för all del en, men jag tror inte att ni kommer att ha någon vidare användning av den. Annat än i ett avseende, och det är om ni vill lära er programmera så går det alldeles utmärkt att göra det också på en liten hemdator. Men att göra något meningsfullt hemma med den i övrigt, än möjligen då spela spel, det kan jag inte se.
Right? Interesting. And it's interesting, I hear in the crowd everybody kind of laughing, right? There's not everybody, some are like, what the hell is this? But the idea is, ha 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 ha, 1984, how wrong could he be? But one of the things that I'm interested in is, 1984, if you had a personal computer, you may not disagree with him, right? We realize the idea of buying tickets, cinema tickets online is not a fantastical vision at this point in our life. It's quotidian. But one of the things that was really interesting to me in managing this idea of vision is what was technology like in 1984, right? We have this kind of, and I'll talk a little bit about this amnesia we're suffering through right now, but this notion that in 1984 was a kind of pre-technological era for us because it was pre-web. I'm actually very much of the mindset, because I lived through that era and I kind of came of age of that era, that's not the case. So at University of Mary Washington in 2014, we opened up a $40 million tech hub. Beautiful building, highly kind of integrated video production, spaces for digital signage everywhere. It was a beautiful building. One of the things we did as a kind of like guerrilla act is we built in one corner of this new shiny building a 1980s living room. Literally. We called it the console living room. Now, one of the coolest things about this space was that we, as an organization and as a community, had people from around the university contribute stuff to the exhibit. So here's kind of what it looked like. This is from a blog post. You'll see the TV with the snow on it. If you're kind of acute to that era, you'll notice there's an Atari 2600. There's even an Intellivision, right? There's some RCA video discs in the back. Really kind of the materiality of 1984 come to life. And this is the group. I actually designed it with Professor Zach Whalen, who works in game studies. And one of the things that he was theorizing, and I found very compelling, was the idea that the 1980s living room was a convergence space. This $40 million building in Mary Washington is called the Convergence Center. But the living room in 1984 was also a convergence center. A convergence around video games, a convergence around music, cassettes, vinyl, right? But nowhere more important, which brings me back to the Swedish anchorman, was this sense of television. Right? Television is what framed our reality of that time. I'm very happy with this piece. This is the probably 82, 83 VCR that I owned as a child. This was an education machine for me, right? Repo Man, right? Alien, Blade Runner, all of these ran through this system. They framed my imagination. They were in some ways analogous to how we imagine the web in this day and age, right? So we have this kind of strange space. So we built this space, and some of you, who maybe are similar to me, would get very homesick when you see these things. This is my, at the time, probably 4-year-old playing a head-to-head Coleco football, right? This is a kind of video game of a different era. And so for me, the materiality of bringing what we think of as our history to life for a community of students who had never experienced it was another way to think about the long history of technology and our relationship to that, right? But it wasn't completely divorced from the internet. Most of what we purchased online came from eBay, right? And so we needed to go eBay shopping. Blip is the digital game that's not digital, by the way. It's not digital at all. We had faculty members buying us Atari 2600 games. This is Yar's Revenge, right? Asteroids, alumni sent that in. And we have this kind of vision in a new building of an old space. And I really was compelled by that. But without some kind of, I would say, like, scholarly representation or interaction, what does it mean? Well, one of the coolest things that happened is we brought an artist in from the City University of New York. His name is Michael Branson Smith. And what he did, which was pretty amazing, is he bought a receiver, or series of receivers, from China. And what they did is they actually, within a small range, broadcasts a television signal. So we got Raspberry Pis, 2 or 3 of them, and we programmed them with TV from the era. Because a living room was not a living room unless the TV showed not only the shows, but also the commercials. So the actual living room converged not only from an Atari video game space or a space where you could see, but where you can embed yourself and watch television. That's an example of television which was running online of communism, right? There was talks about capitalism in China at the time, and in '84, that's kind of a remarkable thing. The other thing, when students would sit down and watch the television and embed the space, they would realize that they were talking about our allies in Iraq who were helping the US fight Iran, right? And this whole frame of a different notion of context and history in relationship to this convergence of technology in a place and time was really powerful. And it kind of reframed for us what we're talking about when we talk about as institutions that long history of technology. The other thing we did is every bit of artifact we got from our community and bought, we created a database online to capture all of it. And you'll notice that has a domain. It's called consolelivingroom.net. Any of you can go to that space. You could see images of the exhibit, which is now taken down. But you can also see all the different artifacts we created, right? In association with the library, we tried to archive everything we did. And this is kind of the online artifact of a space we created. Now, I'm interested in this idea of technology, not necessarily as always already a solution. And I think that was brought up by Stephen quite nicely. But as a process to think critically about our historical moment, whether it be 1984, when we can look back and laugh. I'd be interested who in this audience can think about how we're framing technology as a cultural necessity right now and maybe laugh, or people will laugh at us in 20 or 30 years. So I can laugh at myself to some degree. This is me in 2008. It feels like it's almost like 1984, right? I aged significantly in that time. But I was framing an idea in 2008 that kind of talked, and it was kind of a playful, tongue-in-cheek, called edupunk. You'll notice I have it not tattooed, but Sharpied on my fingers. There's room for the wedding ring, as you'll notice. And there's a kind of WordPress shirt. It's kind of like a goofy thing. Well, actually, this idea of edupunk exploded in a small way on the web, not in any real big way. But the idea behind it was inspired by a novel by the German writer Ernst Junger. And in this novel, Junger talks, and it's a novel from 1957, which is very interesting, again, going to that long history of technology. And in it, you have this character who kind of finds himself between jobs in this technologically changing world. He was a soldier, but now all warfare is drone-related. This is 57. So he doesn't have a job. So he goes to this very kind of powerful technological kind of guru. His name is Zamboni. Giacomo Zamboni. He's an Italian, which is interesting. And he goes to him to try and get a job. Now, one of the interesting things about this book that Bruce Sterling writes about is in 1950s, when we talked about robots and technology, right? We usually talked about something like this, a big anthropomorphic robot that was like us, and maybe it cleaned the house, right? Maybe it kind of went and did this, but we didn't really in that era talk about nanotechnology, small technologies. It's interesting that Junger, in this novel, did just that. And keeping with the theme of the conference, the whole title of the book is called The Glass Bees. And the kind of protagonist in some way of this novel are these little glass bees that pollinate the plants around Zamboni's entire garden. A fascinating moment. Now, how we read this is a couple of ways. Bruce Sterling, when talking about the glass bees, had this to say. Junger perceived that the industrial capitalism is a ridiculous game, so he proved remarkably good at predicting its future moves. He understands that technology is pursued not to accelerate progress, but to intensify power. He fully understands that popular entertainment comes with a military-industrial underside. I think this is one of the things, as a culture, as a community, as users of the online web, as faculty members, as IT developers, as librarians, we have to come to terms with. Understanding that technology is pursued not to accelerate progress, necessarily, but to intensify power. Now, saying this, there may be some, question marks. I was going to show a clip from this movie. This is called Minority Report. Anyone seen this? We talk about the nanotechnology. I'm going to show just a quick clip.
What can you get for a penny?
Let's see if I can get rid
Why
of that.
not create your own custom website today
I can
for just
actually,
one
because
penny
I already have it loaded up.
at
One sec. There we go. Nothing like a commercial during your presentation.
Scanning. Keep your eyes open. Just stay still. Stay still, baby. Open your eyes. It's okay. Blanket. Stay still. Stay still.
Those figures that are climbing up them right now and have gone through those people in this tenement, right, are what are called spiders. And they're reading the retina of these individuals to identify who they are. They're looking for Tom Cruise, who is that figure in the bathroom who's about to put his head in the toilet to hide, or even in the bathtub. And there's this notion of nanotechnology as seen in this 2002 film by Spielberg that is a very different kind of notion of who we are and where we are culturally with technology. Even more so, I talked about this in Turin, Italy, and one of the people reminded me that Black Mirror, which is a new show being aired on Netflix, has a series. The last episode of the 3rd season is about these bees. These drone-controlled bees that are pollinating, because the bees have become extinct, that are pollinating our world, but at the same time are being used to control, basically through facial recognition, kind of a nod to the NSA, who we are and what we do. And so there's this interesting moment where Junger, from 57 to 2017, has never been more relevant about the ways in which we think and manage our notions of technology. Now, just in case you think this is sci-fi in 2017, just a quick search on Wikipedia. On February 11, 2017, the website Science Alert published an article about researchers at Japan National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology working on remote-controlled pollinators using miniature drones. The bee theme continues, right? The future is now. We're living in it in some really fascinating ways. Now, the original kind of push for edupunk was against this technology, what we call the learning management system in the US, which is called the virtual learning environment in Europe. I think it's called one of the two, at least, in New Zealand. But the idea in 2008 was, why, oh why, do we continue to do all of our teaching and learning in this black box? We have this amazing technology called the web, but we've relegated the educational experience to this defined space that often gives our students and our faculty no agency, no privilege, no space for creativity. It redefines the teaching and learning experience. So I went on about that for a long time. At the same time, I was at a university that was actually exploring with social media, and exploring to some great degree, using a whole series of tools like Skype, Instagram, well, Instagram not really, YouTube, of course, Twitter, etc. And so these were tools that, because universities, by and large, were married to the LMS, and that was their only space, many of us had to go outside the university to do anything interesting. And that was an interesting space because we also didn't have support. We didn't have infrastructure. A lot of the great work that was done from 2005 to 2010 or 12 or 13 was lost. It wasn't archived. Librarians and other members of the community really had no control over it. Right? It was this kind of lost space. We played with this tool called WordPress. It's an open source publishing platform that now fuels 30% of all spaces online. Right? It's basically the most popular open source publishing tool in the world. And we built an open source publishing platform from our communities. Now, several universities did this. UBC, University of British Columbia, several universities at CUNY, University of Mary Washington, Virginia Commonwealth University, but this was by no means popular, right? This happened at various places, but basically went away. Giving students and faculty a space where they can create independently was not the rule, it was the exception. Now, one of the things we thought of early that was kind of hopefully a new way of thinking about how we do our courses was this technology called RSS, really simple syndication. The idea of it was pretty simple. Whatever you publish in one space, say on your own blog, on Blogger or WordPress.com or your own WordPress install, could be immediately reproduced in another space. So say a course space. So a student or a faculty member could have their own space, but also publish to a common space. The idea of using the technology of the web to create a kind of broader community on the web. RSS as a technology had problems. One of its biggest problems, or its biggest blow, came when Google shut down Google Reader. So anyone here who used Google Reader knows, post-Google Reader, RSS kind of lost its power, right? And a lot of people still didn't use it. The promise was APIs, right? Application program interfaces, doing similar things to what RSS is, in fact, just a version of RSS, but allowing people to get data out of something like Twitter or YouTube or a blog more seamlessly, right? And it's interesting because API in Italian is appy, which is also B, right? So this idea that the technology was there for us to create spaces and build, and then as a community come together, which reminded me of this awesome bee. So I was inspired by the beekeeper yesterday, right? How many people have a conference where someone comes and talks about beekeeping, right? Like, this is kind of about networking, but it's really about bees. Like, I love that. So I was like, you know, me and my son once talked about bees, And my son is really into those. You know those books that's like the most dangerous creature in the world, right? Like this is a shark, or this is a... Well, one of them was the giant hornet from China. And supposedly, the giant hornet can devour a colony of bees. Like, you know, a couple of hundred giant hornets can devour 30,000 bees. So the Japanese honeybee, and it sounds very strange saying this, but the Japanese honeybee has come up with this fascinating mechanism. Take a look at this.
But the native honeybees know her game. By swinging their abdomens to and fro, they signal their strategy to one another. The bees hold off until the last possible moment. And then, as if on one mind, they swarm. The hornet is engulfed by hundreds of bees. But they don't sting the intruder. Instead, as revealed by thermal photography, they all begin to vibrate, gradually raising their collective temperature to 117 degrees Fahrenheit. Japanese honeybees can tolerate a temperature of 118 degrees. Their victim's upper limit is 115.
So I guess you can guess what happens to the giant hornet, right? It's burnt alive. And they go into that in great detail, but there's a hornet looking for me right now, like, hey, what are you talking about? But this whole notion here that this colony of bees comes together, right, collaboratively, this kind of hive mind that we've talked about early on when we were talking about the web, to protect itself, to control the environment, right? And the Japanese honeybee is a specific thing, because a lot of honeybees can't control or defend themselves, whereas this group figured out coming together, working as a ball, they could burn the giant hornet, which I found really fascinating when we talk about networks, right? Probably one of the biggest questions, if we're going to look back at that 1984 video and laugh, and we can, is if we think about 2017, our moment here today, what's our point? What's the point where people may look back at us and laugh? I think one of this ideas is around this question of data. Now, I'm going to show you a video from 2006. And it's a video created by the American Civil Liberties Union. And in 2006, it seemed like a science fiction on par with Minority Report or Ernst Younger's The Glass Bees, etc. Watch this video, and we will discuss it shortly. It's called Ordering a Pizza in the Future.
Pizza Palace, guaranteed hot in 30 minutes or it's free. This is Mary. May I take your order?
Hi, Mary. Yes, I'd like to order.
Is this Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Thank you for calling again, sir. I show your national identification number is 610-204-999-8-45-54610. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I see you live at 736 Montrose Court, but you're calling from your cell phone. Are you at home?
I'm just leaving work, but I'm...
Oh, we can deliver to Bob's Auto Supply. That's at 175 Lincoln Avenue, yes?
No, I'm on my way home. How do you know all this stuff?
We just got wired into the system, sir.
Oh, well, I'd like to order a couple of your double meat special pizzas.
Sure thing. There'll be a new $20 charge for those, sir.
What do you mean?
Sir, the system shows me that your medical records indicate that you have high blood pressure and extremely high cholesterol. Luckily, we have a new agreement with your national health care provider that allows us to sell you double meat pies as long as you agree to waive all future claims of liability.
What?
Do you agree, sir? You can sign the form when we deliver, but there is a charge for processing. The total is $67 even.
$67?
Well, that includes the delivery surcharge of $15 to cover the added risk to our driver of traveling through an orange zone.
I live in an orange zone?
Now you do. Looks like there was another robbery on Montrose yesterday. You could save $48 if you ordered our special Sprout Submarine Combo and picked it up yourself. Comes with tofu sticks. Those are very tasty, sir. Good value, too.
But I want double meat.
Well, I'm sure you can afford the $67 then. You just bought those tickets to Hawaii. They weren't cheap, eh? Oh, but I see you checked out the budget beach bum at the library last week. Up to you, sir.
All right, all right. I'll get the Sprout subs.
Good choice, sir. Gotta watch that waist if you're hitting the beach, eh? 42 inches. Wow. Man, I'd say tofu and sprouts is like required.
That's how much?
Just between you and me, there's a $3 off coupon in this month's Total Men's Fitness magazine. Your wife Betty subscribes to that, right? Anyhow, clip that and it's $19.99 even. Whoa, looks like you maxed out on all your credit cards. Bring cash, okay?
Want to stop this from happening?
Take action. Okay, so we can, I hate that YouTube automatically creates. Okay, so I show that in 2006, you all be like, ha ha, you laugh still, but you'd be like, you know, in a post-Snowden era where we know that the NSA can access all of our data, this is no longer a fantasy, this is a reality. And when you have a moment in time where something you see, all the details, the Trojan condoms, right? He's maxed out on his credit card. Every detail about his life is accessible in a window. No less than that, a Microsoft window, right? It's dated by the window itself. Now, two people who I'm very fond of and I respect greatly, Audrey Waters and Ken Lane, have been talking for some time about the importance for us as universities to lead on this. To start thinking when we go and build our infrastructures, what happens to faculty and student data? Are we selling this out? Notice the resignation when he says to her, how did you get all this data? And she says, we got logged into the system. And he was, oh, right? It's the most telling moment of the video. That sense of defeat. That, yes, by default, it's inevitable that we will all be plugged into this system. And Audrey and Ken have been fighting this. And they've been talking about this notion that data is the new oil, right? Unless you think, you know, this is some sort of conspiracy theory, the most recent issue of The Economist, which is by no means a left-wing, you know, this is a market-friendly, laissez-faire publication, is talking about the fact that the world's most valuable resource is personal data, and 5 or 6 of the biggest companies in the world, which are tech giants, have access to it. Access to it that makes them concerned. Economist, like I said, a very conservative fiscal publication is talking about intervention. Intervention on the point of national governments, curbing how much data, but another very interesting intervention, the intervention of how much control we, as individuals, have over our personal data. Now this leads me in to some of the talk about educational technology and the environments within which we teach and learn here and now, today. EDUCAUSE did a really interesting white paper about this idea of the next generation digital learning environment, led up by Malcolm Brown, Joanne Dahoney, forgive me if my pronunciation's terrible, and Nancy Millichap. Now, one of the things they came to is the idea that the LMS, and I've been saying this for a long time, over a decade, you know, the LMS, while it serves very administrative purposes, is actually that. It's an administrative tool. It's not a teaching and learning tool. And they talk about this at length, the one-size-fits-all. And one of the things they talk about is through APIs, through syndication, we can start building a more user-driven approach to teacher and learning, right? Spaces that you inhabit, you control, and you publish from and share back with your university. Now, one of the things that this article doesn't fully, and there's the discussion of the API, one of the things the article doesn't fully, I think, deal with, and I found this white paper called My Data, or a Nordic Model for Human-Centered Personal Data Management and Processing, which I'm very interested in, is they take the idea, they take the model of, wait, if an organization, if a company has your data, what are your Bill of Rights as an individual, right? Do you have the right to know what personal information exists about you? Do you have the right to see the actual content of personal information? Can you right to rectify something that's false about you? Do you have the right to obtain personal information and use it freely? Can you ask them to pay you if they use your information in a certain way? Like, why can't you get a cut if they're doing that? What I love about this Nordic model of my data is it kind of reframes the notions of privacy and rights. Why don't we, as individuals, have rights over the data we share? This, to me, seems basic. And if this doesn't start at education, institutions of higher education, where will it start? Now, I was working with Brian Mathers, Brian Lamb, and Rob Farrow at a recent conference, OER 17, which was in London. And next year, I think it will be in Bristol, OER 18. If you get a chance, check it out. It's a great conference. But one of the things we started thinking about, and I was really compelled by, is what if we provided our students and our faculty, or just anyone, a dashboard where you can start to understand what data any given organization is getting about you. And you're notified. Hey, Google's trying to take this information, or Facebook wants this, or Twitter wants this, or this bank is sharing this about you. A kind of dashboard for counter-surveillance. If the logic is these companies are all surveilling us, controlling our data, and reselling it, what are the tools we have at our disposal to challenge that? This, to me, seems a crucial question, and I don't think they really exist yet. Now, that's the first part of my talk. The second part of my talk deals with some of the stuff when Stephen introduced me, we'll talk about. I'm very interested about this moment of data and where we stand as institutions of higher ed in protecting individual data, personal data. The other thing I'm really interested in is spaces that help, support, kind of cultivate creativity for teaching and learning online, because the space is there. So anyway, one of the things I've been doing on my 36-hour flight from Verona to Auckland, and it was a long flight, beautiful place, is I've been reading a book by Giorgio De Maria. That's right, I think I pronounced that right. And this book is an interesting book. It just got republished. It's from 1975 or 77 it was originally published, and it was just recently republished in 2017. And there's a great review in it in the LA Review of Books. But basically, the plot of this novel is, it's kind of interesting. The plot of this novel, let me do a quick summary. And I have it right here, so I'm going to save you the time of me. Let me go right to the plot summary, and I'll read you this because I think it's fascinating. And you tell me if this is at all relevant to our day and age now. In the spare wing of a church-run sanatorium, some zealous youths create, quote-unquote, the library, a space where lonely citizens can read one another's personal diaries and connect with like-minded souls in, quote, dialogues across the ether. This is 1975. But when their scribblings devolve into the ugliest confessions of the macabre, the library's users learn too late that a malicious force has consumed their privacy and their sanity. As the city of Turin suffers a 20-day phenomenon of collective psychosis, culminating in nightly massacres that hundreds of witnesses cannot explain, the library is shut down and erased from history. Wow, fascinating plot, right? Now, if you know anything about Italian history, the 70s were a bloody time in Italy, right? Driven by extreme right-wing and left-wing groups like the Red Brigade, right? And in 1978, even the prime minister was executed. These were bloody times. More than 2,000 people died in the streets of major Italian cities from 1969 through the early 80s. And a lot of people read 20 Days of Turin as an allegory for that, right? Talking about that. But it's interesting because a lot of people also now are coming back to this moment, to this novel, and thinking about it as an allegory for our own time, right? These clean-cut young men who are setting up these libraries where we put all of our most darkest secrets, and then they hold on to it and use it against us. in kind of monstrous giants that are using individuals to crush each other like clubs. So it gets a little crazy. It gets a little Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft. But the allegory for our own moment is fascinating. One of the things that I was really struck by is in the novel, there's a group of kind of like hippies. They call them the millennialists. And you can kind of date the novel because they say the hippies' day was 30 years ago, right? So if that's the case, this probably happens late 90s, early 2000s. And they give out pamphlets, and they're saying, look, the end is near, right? Our time is almost over. You better be ready. And one of the pamphlets says this: among the cardinal sins, after sensuality and disbelief, it mentioned an inattentiveness towards that which seems invisible around us, but is no less worthy of our concern. For me, that has been the cardinal sin of higher ed. The inattentiveness to the invisible workings of how the internet, how data, how technology is changing the way we think and learn. And that's a huge inattentiveness. DS-106. How does that fit in? DS-106 is a course I started teaching at the University of Mary Washington in 2010. The idea of it was pretty simple. I don't want an LMS. I don't want anything to do with one. I want a faculty or a student to get their own space, their own domain online, and to build their space there. By a notion of the internet, of the web, all those different spaces, you publish, called Posse, and this is kind of an indie web concept. You publish on your own site, but syndicate everywhere. If I have a site, jimgroom.com, I should be able to publish there and send it to any course space I want, right? And it be syndicated seamlessly. Kind of what the next generation digital learning environment is kind of suggesting. This was done in 2010. The idea that all of us, every student doesn't get an LMS, they get their own domain. More than that, I don't build the curriculum. They do. The digital assignment built by Martha Burtis was an assignment bank that was framed around the idea that every student could submit an assignment that they either want to do or want others to do. Over the course of now 6 years, 7 years, we've had over 1,000 assignments. I don't know how many thousands of people who have done them, but we have a kind of frame now where the curriculum is not defined as a kind of 10 commandments from the faculty member about what needs to be done in this class. I don't know if you know of a site like Ravelry, right? Which is one of the inspirations for the digital assignment bank. The idea that you build something, you knit something, you put it up there, and other people see it and they riff on it. So this is an example of an assignment, right? You have something like a read poster, which in America were very popular. They would have like a celebrity and say read, and they'd be reading their famous book or their favorite book. And so we asked, make a read poster, right? Some of these assignments had hundreds of people from all over the world submit an assignment. More than that, other people could not only submit an assignment on their own site, they could show other people how to do it. So the actual assignment bank became a shared object of pedagogical desire and learning. People were building these spaces together. It was kind of a very cool idea, but it didn't end there. DS-106 radio, we didn't want to use something like Illuminate or one of those kind of like fluorescent lighted, video systems, right? We want it to be a connection. DS-106 radio, I think, is part of why I'm here. DS-106 radio was created by Grant Potter, who was in North British Columbia at the time. He created an internet radio station, and people from all over the world started sharing their stories from their computer or their cell phone. Peter Rowan, who lives in Melbourne, Australia, found out about this, got on, and while it was February in America, he was letting us listen to the cicadas from the summer in Australia, just with his cell phone. It was magical. While we were digging out snow, he was mowing his lawn. But more than that, people shared music. Nigel Robertson, the reason I'm here, I think, started playing music from the other side of the world that people in America and Europe could build. There was a community connected by radio, but not only by radio, by the culture they love, which for me always made the difference. More than that, can you do this in your LMS? Students not only took the course, not only defined the assignments, but then they also built part of it to share and feature the best work happening in it. So this is a project by 2 students to actually build out part of the course because they wanted to actually highlight the work that inspired them. Now, it gets kind of crazy. Twitter was, in many ways, the network brain of the course. 2011 was when this really took off. I don't know, anyone a Cronenberg fan here? Videodrome, 1984. Videodrome is an interesting movie because it actually frames this notion of the idea of being online but never being in presence. Dr. Brian Oblivion makes a point of never showing up in physical space, only ever on TV. So for this part of the class, the summer class, unbeknownst to my kids and wife, I shaved my head and I became Dr. Oblivion on TV. And I taught the entire class on internet as a fake person, as a fake professor. And the class rebelled. I became the TA. It was a nightmare. I could show you the video, but I don't have the time. We even had sightings of Dr. Oblivion who went missing after the first week in the New York subway, in LA. It was kind of a raucous moment where how do we understand the limits of what's real and what's not when we deal with the online? Which I think was part of what Cronenberg was getting at Videodrome. Now, this, in many ways, the work of DS-106, and this is a great video that I will not show, was the basis for Domain of One's Own. DS-106 proved to many people at the University of Mary Washington and beyond that giving faculty and students their own space to build out their personal space was not only possible, but maybe it was the most ethical, thoughtful thing to do, particularly as we're in a moment here when questions of digital literacy and digital fluency have never been more relevant. Whether you're a librarian, whether you're a technologist, or whether you're a faculty member. These are crucial questions. And if you're not asking yourself, as part of any institution or organization you're part of, where do my faculty, students, and staff sit in literacy and fluency with the digital technologies that everywhere control us, I would say we're not doing our job collectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim, and we have a small gift here from the conference in gratitude for an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.